everyone from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. My name is Joel Reitman, and I have the honor of being the National Co-Chair of the CIJA Board of Directors. My co-chair, Jeff Rosenthal, and I would like to welcome you online today. We are delighted that so many of you have joined this call from across Canada and around the world to help make history with this first ever simultaneous candle lighting across the Middle East and connected, of course, to our community. In addition to our very special guests and panelists, at last count, close to 2,000 people have registered for this event, and it looks like most of you have joined the call. CIJA's mission is to preserve the quality of Jewish life in Canada through advocacy. If you are interested in our work, I invite you to join us on social media and visit cija.ca and sign up on our mailing list. CIJA is a proud advocacy agent of Jewish federations across Canada, which are the pillars of Jewish life, and a sponsor of today's event. Please enjoy today's program, and I will now introduce you to my co-chair, Jeff Rosenthal. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Joel. In addition to the federations, we would like to thank the Embassy of Israel in Ottawa and Rabbi Grover from Beth Tikva Synagogue in Toronto, who you will be hearing from later. In addition, Congregation Machzikei Hadass in Ottawa and Rabbi Sher, who in a moment I will invite to take us through the historic candle lighting. We have a great program for you today. Immediately following the candle lighting, we will have a fascinating discussion about what the Abraham Accords mean for a region that has not seen a ray of diplomatic light quite like this in a very long time. The region and the world are increasingly challenging, that is true, but the Abraham Accords prove that peace and hope are possible. And on that note, I would like to invite Rabbi Idan Sher to introduce our very special guests and take us through this historic candle lighting.
Happy Chanukah, everyone, and welcome. As this new light takes roots across the Middle East, I couldn't imagine a more appropriate way to celebrate than by kindling the lights of the menorah, the lights of Chanukah, simultaneously across the region, and of course, here in Canada as well. We have some remarkable people that will be taking part in this simultaneous lighting in the United Arab Emirates, in Israel, in Bahrain, and then right here in Canada. I'd just like to introduce them quickly. In the UAE today, we have Her Excellency Ambassador Marcy Grossman, the Canadian ambassador to the UAE, to the United Arab Emirates. In Bahrain, we have Her Excellency Ambassador Houda Nonoo. She is actually the first Jewish ambassador to ever be sent to an Arab country, and she is the former ambassador of the Kingdom of Bahrain to the United States and actually Canada as well. In Israel, we have MK, member of Knesset, Michal Kotler-Wunsch. She's a member of the Blue and White Party, and she is the chair of the subcommittee on Israel diaspora relations. We also have Rabbi Yehuda Sarna. He is the chief rabbi of the Jewish Council of the Emirates. And then here in Canada, together with me today is Ohad Nakash Kenar, who is the deputy head of mission at the Embassy of Israel here in Canada. And then you also have me, Idan Sher. I'm the rabbi of Congregation Machzikei Hadass in Ottawa. Before we begin the candle lighting, I just want to point out one little detail. It's a detail that underscores the global scope of this special moment in history. We in Canada, we're still on the fourth day of Chanukah, so we're going to be lighting 4 candles. In the United Arab Emirates, in Israel, and in Bahrain, they're already a day ahead, so you'll see them lighting 5 candles for the Chanukah menorah. At this point, I would like to turn to Ambassador Grossman to say the first blessing on the menorah.
Thank you, Rabbi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah.
I now turn to Ambassador Nonoo to recite the second blessing on the menorah.
Sorry. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim le'avotenu b'yamim hahem b'zaman hazeh.
Amen. Now, Now that we've finished the blessings, I ask everyone lighting today, and please do so at your own home as well, to light their menorah. And now we turn to Member of Knesset, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, to lead us in the age-old song, Ma'oz Tzur, Rock of Ages.
Everybody please sing along in your own homes. It'll help me too. Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati, Lecha na'e leshabeach, Tikun beit tefilati, Vesham toda nezabeach, Letachin mateach, Mitzarem nabeach, אז אגמור בשיר מזמור, חנוכת המזבח.
Wow, thank you so much to everyone that lit the menorah, shared the blessings, shared the singing of Ma'oz Tzur together with us. And now that we've gone through that very historic moment, we literally just made history. We're now going to proceed to our discussion part of our program, to the panel part of our program. And I'd like to invite Shimon Koffler-Fogel, the president and CEO of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs here in Canada, to both introduce and moderate the first segment of today's discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Sher. I'm delighted to be with you, and because time is short, we'll head right into our discussion. The Abraham Accords are amongst the most important and exciting developments in the region in at least a generation. All of you honored guests are following these developments closely, though through different lenses and very different vantage points. We're going to focus more on impressions than political or diplomatic predictions. So the same question to each of you. What are you seeing? What is some of the significance of these developments, and what do they represent? And perhaps most interesting for our viewers, how are they going to impact you and your specific role? Perhaps we'll start, Ambassador Grossman, with you and ask you to address it, and then we'll pass on to Member of Knesset Kotler-Wunsch, Ambassador Nonoo, and finally Rabbi Sarna.
Thank you, Shimon, and happy Hanukkah to you and to all of my friends and associates and loved ones joining from around the world. And of course, I have to give a special shout out to my mishpacha in Montreal and Toronto, my loving family, also in Alberta, sorry for that matter, who are joining us for this history-making Hanukkah event. Before I begin, I actually would like to just take a quick opportunity to thank CIJA for providing the platform for today. Shimon, your team has been exceptional, so thank you so much. As well, thank you to Rabbi Grover. He reached out to me early on with this idea, and I wanted to really make it happen. And really, it was thanks to Rabbi Sher from Machziki Hadass, who basically took the ball and ran with it and did all the heavy lifting for this event. So thank you, Rabbi. And I just want to say that Machziki Hadass really has a special place in my heart. It's played an instrumental role in my extended family life for over 50 years. And Rabbi Bulka, who I hope is joining us somewhere from one of the 2,000 people tonight, he in particular has been a real rock to our family over the last 50 years. So I want to say thank you to him. And finally, my co-conspirators, Houda, Michal, and Rabbi Sarna, we are making miracles every single day. And I really want to thank you guys for your friendship. So Shimon, back to your question. What am I seeing on the ground here in the UAE? Well, I am seeing a lot of Jews, a lot of Israelis in particular. By some counts last week, there were 15,000 Israelis in Dubai last week. They descended in great numbers. They came in on the 4 direct flights, daily direct flights that are operating right now between Tel Aviv and Dubai, soon to be 28 direct daily flights. They were tourists, they were mayors, they were business people, they were philanthropists, they were venture capitalists. They celebrated Chanukah. They lit up a 12-foot Chanukah in front of the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa. They spoke Hebrew, they ate kosher food, they donned kippot, and they sang Sivivon in the streets. So what I'm trying to say is what I'm seeing here in the UAE is between Israel and the UAE is a real friendship and a real warm peace. And this is a really new kind of peace in the Middle East and now spreading across the region. And I can tell you from the UAE side, this is a very authentic, a very welcoming, and a very heartwarming peace.
Thanks. Michal Kochler-Wunsch, MK in Israel, and beloved daughter of a Canadian icon, 2 Canadian icons, because her mother Ariella is a force to be reckoned with as much as her father, the revered Erwin Kochler. What's your take on reaction to developments?
Thank you. And just to follow up on Marcy's thanks, thank you, Shimon, for creating this opportunity for all of us. And thank you to Rabbi Grover and to everybody who made this happen. Marcy, you are a force to be reckoned with as well. And thank you for including and creating this tremendous opportunity to again engage with Houda Nonoo, who we had an opportunity to engage last week in the Knesset. Really, really, I was very emotional. I can tell you, lighting my own Chanukah, at just the thought of what we're doing here, the prospect of what we're doing here, and the fact that there are so many people who I wish I could see. Marcy referred to Rabbi Bulka, and wow, my heart warmed up with really fond thoughts of everybody who we can't see and is there. So thank everybody for joining us to mark this moment in time, which we are lucky enough to be living in, this real historic transformation. And then I'll get straight to your question, Shimon, on the ground. And I've referred to this I'd say paradigm shift as a pivot away from what we traditionally refer to as the 3 no's of 1967 and the Khartoum conference: no to recognition, no to negotiation, and no to peace with Israel, to the 3 yeses. The 3 yeses that have enabled the transition from rejectionism to normalization. And those 3 yeses, in that order: yes to recognition, yes to negotiation, and yes to peace, are really reflected in what Marcy just described as this rush and warmth of a moment of just being recognized with our right to exist. And actually, we mark this holiday, we mark a holiday that, you know, over 2,000 years ago, the attempt to erase Judaism actually is reflected in what we're marking and celebrating here today, in that basic recognition of the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, and of Jews that come as Israelis or as Jews to these incredible countries with which we now have warm relationships with in every way that Marcy describes. And she's there to receive the hundreds and the thousands that are arriving and to see it and to witness it. I think that the transition represents also a path forward in several ways, in recognizing, first of all, what is necessary for long-term sustainable peace. So if I said recognition of the other's right to exist, and also the granting of agency to the person across from you that has equal rights and responsibilities once they are recognized, then enabling what I would call negotiation. And in many, many ways, that is the foundation of what becomes long-lasting, sustainable peace. That's what I believe that we're seeing, not only with regards to these historic Abraham Accords, and really their name reflects all that binds us together, the tremendous shared values that they're founded on, the recognition, as I said, of each other as what we are, Abrahamic faiths, but also lighting the path forward with other nations, with other countries, with other peoples that are willing to accept the transition from the 3 no's, from rejectionism, to the 3 yeses, understanding that in that order, the imperative to recognize in order to negotiate, in order to create peace, are the way forward. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Bahrain's acceptance of the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism in that regard. And as you all know, the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism includes what we call the 3 Ds, the delegitimization, the double standards, and the demonization of the state of Israel. So that IRA definition in its entirety forms what I would call that imperative for recognition. And I think we would be remiss if we did not note the importance of that. And I'll say one more thing in terms of the historic process forward, and that is what it exposes in terms of the reactions that are negative towards the Abraham Accords. And we do see those as well. And they expose a very different axis from Iran to Hezbollah to Hamas, the responses that we have seen of those that do not accept this premise for peace based on negotiation, based on recognition of each other. And I think that that is a way forward for the whole world to recognize what we need to recognize in order to address the challenges that don't only challenge the state of Israel, but in fact challenge all democratic countries and countries with which we share the appreciation for tolerance and coexistence.
So clearly the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, at least in the view of 2,000 screens here in Canada, Michal. Thank you for that. Ambassador Nonoo, your name is now synonymous with superstar status within the Jewish world. And we are so delighted that you were able to join us. Perhaps you can share some of your impressions about what this development represents and what you hope to see coming forward over the next period.
Thank you, Shimon, and thank you for everyone who has organized this amazing event. It truly is historical. It's actually my first simultaneous candle lighting, Hanukkah candle lighting, and there's another one happening tomorrow. So basically, I will tell you how it's impacted me. Personally, it's a very profound impact for me. As a loyal and committed citizen of Bahrain, I naturally respected the reality of the situation in the past and assumed that peace between the Arab world and Israel would not happen in my lifetime, and that I would never be able to travel to Israel. The Abraham Accords has changed all of this. Last month, for the first time in my life, I had the opportunity of visiting Israel as part of the first delegation with His Excellency, the Foreign Minister, Dr. Abdulatif bin Rashid al-Zayani. And within the same week, I had my second opportunity of going with the King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence. So that's twice in 1 week when I've never been at all. What I'm seeing in Bahrain is not as much as Marcy is seeing in the Emirates, but there is excitement in the streets. Social media is buzzing with comments, photos and videos showing support. For example, one of our well-known local social media influencers, Luaya Sharif, who speaks Hebrew, has tweeted videos of himself singing Hanukkah songs and making the bracha over the Hanukkah candles. These videos have now gone viral. What makes the Accords different is that this isn't just from the government, it's actually from the people, it's people to people. So things are actually moving forward. We made history in September 2020 when His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa made the bold move for a relationship of establishing relations. And at the core of the agreement is a desire to create a new Middle East, built on peace and prosperity for all of us. I believe the growing partnerships between Bahrain and Israel will lead to sustainable peace in the region. And moving forward, 2021 will be even more exciting as we feel the impact of the Abraham Accords. The first Gulf Air flight is actually scheduled for January 2020. And we will also be seeing collaborations in business, healthcare, education, travel, and tourism sectors, which will bring further our leaders' bold vision to reality. So we are moving forward and at a very fast pace, and it's amazing to see all this happening.
Thank you so much. We'll wrap up this question with you, Rabbi Sarna. You straddle a foot on both sides of the ocean. Perhaps you can share your impressions of the significance of these events.
My gratitude to you and to the whole team at CIJA for making this possible. Straddle, I think, is the name of the game. I mean, everybody else who's on this panel has in one way or another straddled these oceans and has recognized that that sometimes, although having something of a hyphenated identity can make things a bit more complicated, they also can be the very tension that produces creativity and breakthroughs. So I especially wanted to say thank you to Ambassador Nonoo, Ambassador Grossman, for really having guided me over the past year and a half, 2 years that I've served as chief rabbi. The combination of passion for Judaism, Jewish community, as well as true diplomatic genius is something that I can never repay. And the opening up of the Knesset floor, the Knesset committee, that Michal has, MK Cutler Wunsch has done twice, has been extremely important once again in creating those bonds. Let me just say, I just want to make 2 points. One is that the biggest mistake that we all can make in looking at the Abraham Accords is treating them like a transaction and not a covenant. Transaction is based on shared interests and bottom line, and a covenant is really based on a shared vision for the future. And when people talk about warm peace, which is a term that a number of people have used recently, what they mean is that this is not an agreement between militaries, it's not an agreement between banks, it's not an agreement between corporations. Well, it's all of those things, of course. But when we say warm peace, what we really mean is people to people. That people are listening to each other, they're understanding each other, they're learning about each other's narratives, each other's languages, each other's cultures. And I think that there's something very, very promising, which we already see afoot, but we cannot take for granted. We cannot take for granted that the civil societies, the educators, the intellectuals, the religious leaders, the youth activists, the environmentalists, we cannot take for granted that those people are going to find each other, meet each other, learn from each other, and build with each other. The second thing I wanted to mention is just how important I believe it is that women play a leadership role in establishing the peace. I have to say that this is the first panel that I've spoken on, which has been majority women, and not in an essentializing way or in a patronizing way. I truly and wholeheartedly believe that the role that women have to play in ensuring that the peace is made, the peace sticks, the peace is deep, the peace is rich, cannot be understated.
Thank you, Rabbi Sarna. Now, for the second question, I have a slightly more specific one to pose to each of you, starting, if we could, Ambassador Nonoo, with you, and sort of flowing from where Rabbi Sarna ended off. While you're not the first female ambassador, you are the first Jew ever to be named as a diplomatic representative of an Arab country. What does that mean to you, and what does it mean more generally? And is it suggestive of where Bahrain may be headed over the coming years?
Okay, so I was very honored to serve my country as its ambassador to the United States. I was also non-resident ambassador to Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. So I had 5 major countries. I was very appreciative of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa and our former Foreign Minister Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa for appointing me to this important position and for all their support that they gave me. It was an honor to serve as Bahrain's 3rd female ambassador and its 1st Jewish one. In some ways, it's more surprising to non-Bahrainis that Bahrain appointed a Jewish ambassador, because His Majesty has personally backed a policy of interfaith engagement for decades. He has always supported equal rights and opportunities for people of all faiths, and so it didn't stick out as odd to me that a Jew would be appointed to this position, as His Majesty always made sure that we had the same opportunities as others. Since my post in the United States, we're starting to see women in the Gulf, including in Bahrain, take a more active role in various parts of government. For example, in 2018, Bahrain broke its record of female representation in parliament when 6 women MPs were elected. And my hope is that more will be elected in 2022 when we go through our next election cycle. Regionally, since my time in Bahrain, other Gulf states such as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has also appointed female ambassadors. Oman had the first female ambassador from the Gulf, and that was in 2006. So a lot of things are changing and women are taking a more active role in diplomacy.
Thank you so much. Michal, you're a sitting member of the Knesset. You have obviously very deep ties to Canada, and you play an important role in diaspora relations. With respect to the Abraham Accords, what reactions are you hearing from Israelis? What are you hearing from the diaspora through your very large network? And is there alignment or is there a disconnect between how we are assimilating that development in the diaspora relative to the way they're embracing it in Israel?
So I'll say, first of all, in terms of what's happening in Israel on the ground, you have to know that the sense of excitement is really palpable. It's really just, and I want to echo what Rabbi Sarna referred to, and we would be remiss if we thought it was just about shared interests. Again, the name Abraham Accords really refers to the foundational values that bind us together. And actually, I think in many, many ways, in a world that's becoming more and more extreme, what they point out is the power of moderation. And I say with the power of moderation comes the responsibility of the moderates, the moderate Jews, the moderate Arabs, the moderates throughout the world. And I think that in terms of that understanding, we have to hone in on the possibility of what this means, and also, I would say, empower those voices. So I would be remiss if I didn't refer to, for example, the educational or the textbooks that are utilized today in the UAE. There was a huge reform in 2016 led by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed with regards to moral education, mandating students from elementary school and high school to study morality, civic studies, cultural studies, and community. The understanding of this curriculum that it must teach about tolerance, fairness, and equality. And I want to refer also to the term coexistence that we discussed at the committee in Knesset that Houda Nonoo attended, but also Rabbi Sarna touched upon the multiplicity of identities and the advantage, actually not disadvantage, of the many identities that we bring and the coexistence with which those identities must live together, apropos Jews and Muslims, Jews and Arabs and beyond. And I want to say, in addition to that, the tremendous impact and importance of education, including, by the way, in the UAE, actually the Abraham Accords have already been internalized in the curriculum that's passed to young ambassadors between Emirati and Israeli children. And in that case, the important opportunity that this presents, and Rabbi Sarna referred to this, to renew the covenant way deeper than, the business interests and, of course, the excitement of just visiting and the ability that I heard about and the emotional understanding that Houda can now visit Israel, that there are families that weren't able to see one another ever and now can see each other. And I'll say one more thing about that. The voices of Jews from Arab lands, 850,000 Jews from Arab lands and Iran, that communities of 2,500 years were erased in a period of 25 years, have a tremendous role to play in the transformation of that trauma to creating bridges for peace. So looking at all of that and understanding that really we are not only living at a historic time, but I would say at a time of great hope that leaves us with tremendous responsibility to make those connections, to act in order to advance the possibility of those, as I said, educational manifestations in our own curricula, internally in Israel, and of course outside. And I'll say in our case, and I actually just proposed a law with regards to studying Arabic in all schools in Israel, all schools. there's a very important understanding that comes through this. Israel is only 72 years old. Sometimes we think of as Israel, you know, it's been here forever, and some may even take it for granted. 72 years is really a very short time for a country to live. I think that this moment in time meets Israel at an intersection of many challenges that it has, including the importance of viewpoint diversity, of multiple identities that we bring to the fore, that we have to discuss in terms of Israel's Jewish and democratic identity, and that this opportunity, this historic opportunity, actually shines a great spotlight, both in Israel internally, certainly in terms of Jewish-Arab relations in Israel, and much beyond. Israel relations with all countries, Arab countries included, and all peoples, and I differentiate peoples from leadership, all peoples that are accepting of this paradigm shift, of this historic pivot towards, you know, what I called before the 3 S's, towards the understanding of recognition, negotiation, and sustainable, long-lasting peace. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the importance of women's voices, not because we're women, but in women's voices, in understanding and making that accessible to entire society, because we are 51% of the population. Because when I speak to Houda and when I see Marcy, who I look forward to meeting in person, you know, someday very, very soon, I know that there is an additional understanding and additional voices and additional viewpoint diversity around the table as we take our responsibility in what I said, you know, before, yes, the power of moderation, and now the responsibility of moderates to act together as we advance this.
Thank you. Rabbi Sarna, as we noted earlier, you wear multiple hats as Chief Rabbi of the UAE and as Director of the Bronfman Center for Jewish Life at NYU. So you have a number of constituencies that you are connected to. So my question to you is similar. How are these developments being received by your congregants, if you will, in the UAE? And what's been the reaction on campus?
In the UAE, it's euphoria. That's the only word I can use. When I went for the first time to the UAE to help build, to lend a hand in building NYU Abu Dhabi, I was very self-conscious about my Jewish identity. I was invited because I was the rabbi at New York University, and I came wearing my kippah, wearing my tzitzit out as I would in New York, as I would in Montreal, Toronto, etc. And this time when I came through the airport, when I was there for Rosh Hashanah, for Sukkot, when I came through the airport, it was, I was greeted with shalom, and I was with my kids, and, as each one of them presented their passport, and my son's name is Moshe. So the person who was checking his passport said, "Oh, that's like Musa." Yeah, my son David said, "Oh, that's like Daoud," and just going down the line of 6 kids. So it took us a while to get through customs. And that's what I would say. Look, in the US, the response to the Jewish community, interestingly, has been more muted, partly because there are other things going on. I don't know if you heard in Canada, but there was an election that took place in the United States. So that took up a lot of energy. And it was interesting, even just looking at the Jewish publications in the United States, it's not front page news. It was front page news for a little bit of time, but it's not the thing that's dominating the conversation. And on the university campus, what I find is that if there is going to be any opposition to the Abraham Accords, or cynicism, I would say, or skepticism, it's going to come from the progressive left. And part of that is populated by Jewish students. And I think we'll have to see, once campus life it comes roaring back in its fullest form. It's hard to tell at this point exactly what's going to emerge. I don't know because there is going to be some conversation about who is becoming disenfranchised by this kind of agreement. Of course, in the most hopeful sense, this will enfranchise, and, to use M.K. Cutler-Wunsch's term, provide agency for so many more people than previously had it. And nevertheless, there's going to be a conversation about who is being disenfranchised. Therefore, I believe it's incumbent among every stakeholder, and Canada and Canadian Jewry is a major stakeholder in this working, to make sure that those who are at risk of becoming more vulnerable, of becoming disempowered, have actually the opposite experience. How can we redouble our efforts to make sure that everybody, as many people as possible, experience a kind of empowerment as a result of this new wind that's sweeping across the region?
Rabbi Sarna, thank you. That was a powerful insight, and I think it may help inform Ambassador Grossman, Achron Chaviv, to whom I'll pose the last question in this segment of the program. Obviously, you have 2,000-ish screens that are mostly anchored here in Canada. So there's a real desire to see Canada constructively and positively implicated in ever deeper ways in the region. Ambassador Grossman, what opportunities do you see for Canada in the UAE in particular, and the rapidly evolving region more broadly? And if I may, what do these developments mean to you personally, both as an active and involved member of the Jewish community, but especially as a Canadian diplomat?
Thank you, Shimon. A lot of questions to unpack. Let me just start by saying at the outset that Canada really did very warmly welcome the normalization of ties between the UAE and Israel. We were actually one of the first calls that the UAE Minister of Foreign Affairs made to phoning Minister Champagne to announce just after the Abraham Accords what had transpired on August the 13th. And really, Israel and the UAE are two of our closest friends in the region, and we are really happy to support in continuing to foster those relationships in any way that we can, and also to build some trilateral ones between Canada, Israel, and the UAE. And I think just at the outset, there's a couple of very easy avenues for Canadians to be involved. Michal's already talked about it a little bit, and I think every other speaker has touched on it, but the diaspora, the people-to-people ties. So, first of all, maybe all Canadians don't know that they're one of the largest Jewish diasporas in the world live in Canada, come from Canada. Many of the 2,000 people on the phone here, on the line here today, make up that very strong diaspora. They're influential people, they're people with strong ties to Israel, and a large proportion of those folks have actually made aliyah. So there's a lot of natural connectivity. And we also actually have a very significant Arab diaspora in Canada, many of whom are equally interested in finding pathways to peace in the Middle East. And I think that is a portion of our community that we really do need to engage. In UAE, the Canadian diaspora is equally as strong. I don't know if people realize it, but there's actually 40,000 Canadians who make their home here in the UAE. So there's a lot of opportunities to triangulate. As Canadians, diversity is our strength. We lead the way in immigration. We live and breathe interfaith. I think we can really be here to help build bridges between the three countries. And, Canada's often known as the honest broker or the middle power. And I think that is a role definitely that we can play in this relationship. So diaspora people. The second is economic. And again, that's a really easy one of these very low hanging fruits. Given that Canada already shares very strong economic ties with UAE and Israel, there is a lot to build on. It's a great area of promise between the three countries, especially in areas of mutual interest. So cyber, AI, different types of technology, where all three countries are really trying to make inroads and opportunities. And so I strongly encourage all the business people on the line. If you had UAE on your radar before, but were reticent about coming to this market because you were Jewish, because you were uncertain, let me assure you that you do not need to hesitate. This is an amazing market. You are more than welcome to do business here. This is an incredible opportunity for Canadian companies, not just in the UAE. So we already have a very strong bilateral relationship between Canada and the UAE in agriculture, in energy, in clean tech. And we have a very strong trade commissioner service here in our 2 offices in Dubai and Abu Dhabi that are here to really help Canadian business people get their products and services into the market. But more regionally, I think people might not realize that Dubai is actually the entrepot or the hub of the broader Manasseh region, Middle East, North Africa, South Asia. So if you do business here in Dubai, you have an automatic reach to a much, much larger constituency. So, and that hub now includes Israel, which is also very exciting. So this is a great opportunity for Canadian companies. There's already 150 Canadian companies that are here in this market using the UAE as a hub for their broader Middle East, Manasseh objectives. And I think it's a really great opportunity for Canadians and Canadian companies to engage economically between UAE and Israel. And just some examples, I met with plenty of venture capitalists in the last few days coming through the UAE. They're either Israelis living in Canada, Canadians living in Israel. They are very well-positioned individuals, and they all really are excited about wanting to make something happen in the UAE. And I would not be surprised if some of those deals come to fruition very quickly.
Marcy, thanks so much. I'm just going to ask you to save a little of that chocolate Chanukah guilt for when I come visit you in the UAE. This concludes the first segment of the program today. It's been an honor for me to engage in a little bit of conversation with you. Thank you so much for making yourselves available. And now I will turn it back to my synagogue's spiritual leader, Rabbi Dan Sher, to continue the program. Thank you all.
Shimon, I didn't answer one of your questions about what it means to be a diplomat here in the UAE. I'm going to cover it in the second half a little bit more, but I wasn't ignoring your question.
It's all good.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shimon. So we'll get right to it. A lot of very important ideas have come up, and I'd like to use this opportunity to expand on some of them with the 4 of you. And we'll begin with Ambassador Grossman. One of the things that Rabbi Sarna actually spoke about was the role of women. And obviously we're hearing about how the UAE has chosen to really help chart a new path forward for the Middle East. And you are taking a lead in many of those areas of progress. And I was wondering if you could speak to one specific area, the role of women, rights, available opportunities that you are progressing and you are seeing happening in the UAE at this moment in time.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi. So when I arrived in Dubai in 2018, I really had no clue what it was going to be like being a female in the UAE, a Jewish female in the UAE, basically in an Arab Muslim country. And to be quite honest, I actually thought at the time in 2018, way back then, that it was actually a bold move for my government to send me. I certainly didn't think within 2 years of having that thought that I would actually be as popular as I am right now. It's like I'm a unicorn. People are always trying to find out what's it like being a woman in the UAE, what's it like being a Jewish woman in the UAE, and all of a sudden I'm the go-to person. So certainly none of us knew, though, how the politics were going to unfold here so quickly. When I got here in 2018, the Jewish community was not even out of the shadows yet. So that's 2 years ago. It only emerged from the shadows, actually quite symbolically at Hanukkah of 2018, small Jewish community. Who would have thought after that the year of 2019 would be the year of tolerance in the UAE? A whole year dedicated to tolerance and coexistence. And in that year, the Pope would come and visit. And if that was not substantial enough, it was during that Pope visit where the government announced the Abrahamic Family House, the creation of a church, a mosque, and a synagogue all sharing the same property. So even though it wasn't clear to me what was going to transpire when I got here, I can say that from the moment of my arrival in this very beautiful country, I was really welcomed very warmly. I could see right away there was this significant attention paid to diversity, to gender equality, And I really felt very much at home here. And people have well, not say uninformed, but people just don't know what happens here in the UAE. They maybe read about things and have not ever having come here. But what they don't realize is the role of the woman here is very, very profound. It goes back to the founding father, Sheikh Zayed. And in fact, right now there are 10 female Emirati cabinet ministers. The person who launched the UAE Mars probe satellite to Mars, obviously, during the summer was a woman. Women graduate from university at a much higher rate. So I could tell that I was going to be in good company when I came here. So when I look at the Abraham Accords, of course, I'm in awe. I pinch myself every day. I can't believe that I'm here as the Abraham Accords are unfolding. But I'm also curiously looking for something else. I'm looking for the tent of Sarah. I'm actually looking for the tent of Sarah or the tent of Hagar, or Hajar, as they say in Arabic. I'm hoping for more women. I'm hoping to bring in the matriarchs. I think that women play an important role in making decisions that are going to happen and transpire over the course of the Abraham Accords. Women are natural born peace builders, peacemakers, and peacekeepers. So they really need to have a seat at the table. And I'm lucky that I'm here representing Canada and I'm able to reflect a feminist foreign policy. And I really do hope that as the days and weeks and months unfold, that we will see more women around the table and we will see that tent for Sarah and Hajar. I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to say anything at the end, so I'm going to do my closing remark now, just in case I don't. But I just really wanted to say that I joined the Foreign Service 20 years ago with a vision to one day be in a role where I could bring peace to the Middle East. I'll be honest with you, I really never thought it was going to be here in the UAE, but it is. And, you know, I think the world moves in mysterious ways, and I totally believe that we find ourselves in the right place at the right time. So I really just want to say that as a woman, as a Canadian and as a Jewish woman, I really could not be more proud to be representing my country in the UAE at this moment in time. I have a front row seat with witnessing history transpire, and it's really an incredible experience. So when you hear me speaking in the future about the Abraham Accords, I will be talking a lot about Sarah. Thank you, Rabbi.
Absolutely. Sarah and Hagar. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Grossman.
Absolutely, because I think women from both communities have a lot to offer. And they also influence the young people who also have an incredible amount to offer.
Yeah, brilliant way to put it. Thank you so much. And we will be talking about shortly with Rabbi Sarna a little bit about the Abrahamic House. But we're going to turn now to Ambassador Nonoo. I've gotten to know you a little bit through WhatsApp, but probably even more profoundly through your writings. And one of the original writings that I read of yours was an article titled Shalom and Welcome to Bahrain, very recently after the Abraham Accords were signed. And you obviously envision a situation of real friendship between Israel and the global Jewish community and Bahrain and the global Arab community. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you envision ever since the signing of the Abraham Accords.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. It's been great that I was introduced to you by Marcy. Thanks, Marcy, for that. Basically, I believe that the growing partnership between the Gulf and Israel will lead to a sustainable peace in the region. As I said before, the core of these agreements is the desire to create a new Middle East built on peace and prosperity for us all. In 2008, at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, former Foreign Minister, His Excellency Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, in his speech, mentioned the importance of bringing all countries in the Middle East around the same table. And when he was asked what countries he meant in an interview, he said, all the Arab countries plus Turkey, Israel, and Iran. 1 year later, His Royal Highness Crown Prince and Prime Minister Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, where he mentioned that we need to talk to the Israeli people face to face. In 2020, this vision has become reality. Together, we are changing history. We are doing this for our children, because by imprinting the lessons of peace and coexistence within them now, they will grow up to be the future political and business leaders of the next generation. And they will not know of the chasm that previous generations faced. As our Bahraini children start to learn about Judaism and Israeli culture in their school, and Israeli children learn more about Islam and Gulf culture in theirs, they will carry these lessons with them as they grow to lead this powerful region. I also want to mention one thing. The word tolerance, I don't agree with the word tolerance. We need to use the word coexistence. Tolerance to me means we are tolerating each other, whereas existence is we're coexisting with each other. And this is how we've always been in Bahrain. We've always coexisted. We've never tolerated other people. We coexist with each other. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you. Very, very, really good point. If anyone has not yet read Ambassador Nonoo's recollection of her first time in Israel, it's one of the most profound reads of 2020, and I would definitely recommend it. I'd like to continue on now to Michal, to member of Knesset, Michal Kotler-Wunsch. What's fascinating is that there's something happening beyond politics. We're seeing a cultural, people-to-people relationship being formed throughout the Middle East right now. You have a couple of quick Emirati leadership to perform. He recently the recent 50% stake acquisition of a member of the royal family of the UAE of the storied soccer club Beitar Yerushalayim. These developments would have been unimaginable several months ago. Does this point to some sort of changing attitude in the Israeli and Arab societies? And do you think that we're going to see further coexistence and friendships between Jewish and Arab Israelis, Jews and Muslims within Israel and throughout the entire world?
So first of all, I would say in Hebrew, Lu Yehi. I mean, that is our deepest hope. The state of Israel, as you well know, and every Jew around the world prays for peace 3 times a day. And so our aspiration for peace and the understanding that Houda shared with me, as I said, in Knesset as well, and that I actually felt very comfortable with as a Canadian Israeli, that is not, tolerance is not enough. Coexistence is what we should strive for. Coexistence refers to what I spoke about with regards to recognition, but I also think it's a very important responsibility for other countries. And I would say, as a very proud Canadian as well, it's also an opportunity for countries such as Canada that really is the founder of the responsibility to protect human rights doctrine, that really regards itself and is one of the central trustees of international law and of human rights, to take responsibility and to play a leading role in the potential new Middle East and not just miss the potential of it. And I would say that internally in the state of Israel, there is absolutely an excitement for what this prospect leads. And I would hope that with the Palestinians as well, and as I said, with all other countries willing to embrace the model of recognition, negotiation, and peace, this can be led forward. But there is an imperative for the rest of the world, Canada included, and I would say other countries as well, the European countries and so forth, to really take the opportunity and I would say the responsibility, given the various, sort of niche foreign policy interests in promoting peace and coexistence and human rights around the world, in insisting upon these positive values and in identifying and exposing double standards that enable the opposite, that enable a culture of impunity, that enable a continued rejectionism. Because the minute that we enable a culture or double standards that enable that rejectionism, that enable a culture of impunity, and we do not expose them and address them, then the likelihood of this prospect paradigmal shift spreading lessons. I think that there is really an international sort of commitment to understand that the mission, and I would say the mission to uphold, promote, and protect international law and human rights as a global understanding of our prospective promise to never again. In fact, in a world of again and again, it's not that we don't know what's happening in Iran or in other countries in our region, in Syria and so forth. It is that we have together the responsibility of identifying and exposing the double standards that enable cultures of impunity. And this historic moment is the intersection not only for Israel internally, it would be really a missed opportunity of if countries such as Canada, if countries that are the trustees of international law and human rights don't utilize this opportunity to identify, to expose double standards, to address them so that we can fulfill our shared mandate, promoting coexistence and ensuring long-lasting and sustainable peace within Israel internally, but throughout the region.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I just want to point out, we of course are running a little bit late. These conversations have just been so compelling. All of the panelists have agreed to stay on for a couple of extra minutes past the hour. So I'm going to conclude my part of the discussion with asking Rabbi Sarna a final question. And as I said, it's all about the Abrahamic Family House Project. You are deeply involved in it. Could you speak to it? Can you tell us a little bit about it? And can you tell us about what you think its impact will be on interreligious harmony throughout the world?
Every family reunion needs the right venue. And where else is there in the world that that the three Abrahamic traditions, religions can gather, where there's a feeling of harmony, of shared past, of shared future? And I think that's really the transformative power, the very bold statement that on the Arabian Peninsula will be a mosque, church, synagogue, each building, same height, each building oriented to that religion's traditional direction of prayer. Each house of worship being constructed down to the most minute detail. And I can tell you this because I worked on the mikvah in the synagogue complex, down to the finest minute detail of each tradition. That is, each tradition is being respected to the max. And I think when you imagine that kind of complex being a locus, a point of meeting in time, we're talking not just about in the present, different kinds of people coming together, but we're also talking about a meeting over time. We'd have to be present there at some point, when it's open, hopefully 2022. We have to imagine ourselves coming together as children of Abraham and meeting Abraham Avinu, meeting our forefather, meeting Sarah, Imenu, meeting Hagar, a meeting across time. And the other thing that I've learned about this building is that this is not a building that's being constructed for use for the next 10 years or 20 years, but for hundreds of years. I mean, with no expense spared, to be the kind of world monument that has a gravitational pull with all that history has invested in that relationship. And I would just say this, we owe it to the next generation and generations in this very moment where houses of worship have come under brutal attack. I can speak from the United States. I know that the same is true in Canada in different ways, and around the world, not just synagogues, not just churches, not just mosques, but places are being attacked, not despite the fact that they're sacred, but because the fact they're sacred. And what better statement to make to the world that at this time, in this moment of religious violence motivated in religion, that people can stand up and say, not in our name. I feel very indebted to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who sadly is no longer with us. I was able to spend 5 years with him post his chief rabbinate when he was a global distinguished professor at New York University, and had an early read and edit of his book, Not in Our Name. And that book is prescient. It foresees the potential devastating power of religious violence. And whatever that danger is, we need to dig deep into our own traditions to not just counter that, but transform that, to take the very impulse, which is the source of religious motivated violence, and say, how can we unleash a power that's even greater than that, which is the power to transform for good, based on religious and spiritual principles.
Oh, wow. Rabbi Sarna, thank you so much. That was an incredibly hopeful message, just as all of our panelists' messages today have just been so hopeful. I know there are still so many questions that every one of us on this call would love to ask. But at this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Rabbi Jared Grover, the rabbi of the Bet Tikva Synagogue in Toronto, who will lead a brief question and answer session.
Thanks, Rabbi Sher. It's an honor for me to be a part, just to listen in to this fascinating conversation and be part of this historic event. Ambassador Nonoo, when you said, She'asa nisim lavotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh, you God who makes miracles in those days and in these days, I couldn't help but feel like we were witnessing that blessing in front of our eyes. I wonder who might be on this panel if we do this again next year. I want to ask my first question to you, Rabbi Sarna. It would seem to me that if Canadians are going to use their traditional role as bridge builders, help bring some understanding to cultures and communities with different histories, that we're going to have some difficult conversations too, not just the easy ones. Have you had those difficult conversations, specifically about the Palestinian issue, with local people? And I'd be curious to know as well how that's gone for other members of the panel who have attempted to have those conversation and build those bridges.
I mean, what is dialogue if you're not going to talk about the hard stuff, right? So, absolutely. And we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that in every country that is signing normalization agreements with Israel, of course, there are voices of dissent. There are, of course, people who identify as Palestinian, who are of Palestinian descent present in each country, not just present, but also in positions of power or influence. And one of the things that I hear, even from people who are Palestinian, who either left themselves or who are descendants of people who left, is given the demographics of the region, just how much of the Arab world is under age 30, under age 35, who has really no personal recollection of what transpired 75 years ago, but who definitely want to be in a better place over the next 70, 75 years. There is a reckoning with the very no's that M.K. Cutler once was referring to. And there's a feeling of, where has this gotten us? Where has this brought us? Adopting a stance towards Israel, which has been, which has said no to so much. I mean, where has this really brought us? And I think, if anything, that is the argument, that is the internal argument that is the most compelling and is actually the one that's moving the region forward. Where has no got us? And now let's see, where will yes get us?
Ambassador Nonoo, does that resonate for you, those conversations?
What we want to see is basically the Palestinians living in harmony with the Israelis. It's very important that that happens. The Abraham Accords is not just getting Israel and the Arab and the Emirates and Bahrain on board. It also has to take the Palestinians basically bring them into the whole party, not to leave them out. So it's very, very important that we do include them, and we have to do something to bring them on board.
And a last question for a member of Knesset Kotler Wunsch and Ambassador Grossman. Fast forward 10 years from now, what do you think people are going to be saying about the Abraham Accords?
So really that depends on us. I think we write the story. I think we get to identify the potential of this paradigm shift, of this historic moment. But it requires, and I would be remiss if I didn't refer, just like Rabbi Sachs did, to the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, that distinguishes between optimism and hope. And he refers to hope as very, very active. And hope requires courage, the courage to make a world a better place, because optimism just assumes it'll be a better place. That courage has actually been shown in the leadership, I would say, of the countries that have led forward, the UAE and Bahrain, Sudan, the countries that have followed suit. That courage to give hope to the future generations based on our shared past, based on Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, based on them, to give that hope to future generations. And that hope requires, and I'll say sadly, and some of you may be aware of this, the members of the Joint Arab List in Israel's Knesset actually voted against the Abraham Accords. When we brought to Knesset at a very historic moment in our times and spoke about many of the things we're talking about, members of Knesset in Israel's Knesset voted against the Abraham Accords in a rejectionism of Israel's right to exist as Jewish and democratic. Yes, Israel's right to exist as democratic is acceptable, but not as Jewish and democratic. I think that that's where I refer to the people, the Palestinian people. And I think that Houda spoke about the importance of really the future and the people. And we really reflected on the potential, and Rabbi Sarna spoke about it as well, the future generations and how do we give that hope, and what is the role of leadership, and the imperative for courageous leadership in order to give that hope. And I'll just to reflect a little bit of what Rabbi Sarna referred to in Rabbi Sachs's book, Not in God's Name. You know, in an incredibly telling speech, he writes, or actually it's from the Washington Post, about the symbol of Chanukah, which we're celebrating today. The Chanukiah that we light for 8 days in memory of the temple menorah, purified and rededicated by the Maccabees all those centuries ago. Faith is like a flame. Properly tended, it gives light and warmth, but let loose, it can burn and destroy. We need, in the 21st century, a global Chanukah, a festival of freedom for all the world's faiths. For though my faith is not yours, and your faith is not mine, if we are each free to light our own flame, together we can banish some of the darkness of the world. And when has this been more relevant than today? And when has Houda's teaching of coexistence and what we've understood been more relevant to that message? So with God's help and with our own doing, in 10 years, I hope that we see much more of the effects of the Abraham Accords spread out through the region, and I would say throughout the world.
Amen to that.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Grover. I just want to conclude by saying this has been a great honor. It's been a great honor to be a part of this. And I thank all of you for listening in, the almost 2,000 people that are listening in today. Thank you for being a part of this historic event. When we first conceived of this idea, the emails back and forth between me and Ambassador Grossman were all about how big of a deal this is. This is front page news, as Rabbi Sarna pointed out. And the very idea that now that it's been brought to fruition with so many people from throughout Canada has really proven that point in the most resonant of ways. I want to thank CIJA, the team at CIJA, the incredibly talented team at CIJA, for putting this all together. I want to thank Ambassador Grossman for working on this together with me from its very conception. I want to thank all of our special guests on the panel today, all of you that have agreed to spend your time with our community. We are extremely grateful. And again, I want to thank all of you for listening as we celebrate the light that is quickly and magnificently spreading across the Middle East. On behalf of everyone on this call, we wish you a happy Hanukkah.